Evan Miles arrived at Parkwood Campground with his three daughters Ava, Leah, and Sophie seeking peace in nature. 48 hours later, the girls were found dead in their tent, and Evan had vanished without a trace. What began as a quiet family trip turned into one of the most disturbing manhunts in recent history, raising one terrifying question: what really happened under the cover of those tall pines? On the morning of July 18, 2022, the Parkwood National Campground welcomed a steady stream of visitors seeking to escape their everyday lives and immerse themselves in nature. Among them was Evan Miles, a 39-year-old father who arrived with his three daughters, Ava, age 12, Leah, age 9, and Sophie, age 6. The family drove in just after sunrise in their gray SUV, packed with camping gear and enough food for several days. Witnesses remembered them as a quiet family, polite but reserved. Evan appeared tired, worn down even, but still attentive to his daughters. They checked in at Site 42, one of the more secluded camping areas, surrounded by tall pines and far from the crowded main loop. That day passed uneventfully. The girls were seen skipping stones at the lake while Evan set up their tent and cooking area. A nearby camper later told investigators she saw Evan reading a book under the shade while the girls played tag near the woods. There were no signs of tension, no unusual behavior. In fact, several people recalled Evan as calm and organized, even friendly in a distant sort of way. As evening fell, he helped his daughters toast marshmallows around a small fire. Everything about the trip seemed ordinary, maybe even idyllic. At around 8:45 p.m., Evan posted a photo on social media. The girls bundled up in sleeping bags beside the fire, their faces lit with smiles and warm light. The caption read, "Just us and the stars. No noise, no stress." It would be the last known image of them alive. Over the next 36 hours, there were no reported interactions from the family. That wasn't unusual at Parkwood, where many campers came for solitude and unplugged living. But what was strange was that no one ever saw Evan or the girls again. Other campers passed by their site occasionally and noted that the tent remained zipped shut and the fire pit untouched. One camper remembered hearing rustling late at night but assumed it was wildlife. By the morning of July 20th, a fellow camper, concerned by the continued silence, approached the tent. The air was oddly still, and the campsite looked frozen in time. The food cooler was untouched, and a bag of apples had begun to rot. The camper knocked on the tent and called out. No answer. After some hesitation, he alerted park rangers, who arrived within 30 minutes. When rangers opened the tent, they were met with an unsettling calm. Inside, the three girls lay in their sleeping bags as if simply asleep. There were no screams, no signs of violence, no struggle, just stillness. Each girl was zipped in tightly, their faces pale, their bodies lifeless. Rangers immediately called in law enforcement. As the investigation began, the most shocking discovery was that Evan was not among the dead. His sleeping bag was empty. His phone was missing. There were no footprints leading away from the site. His car was found parked just outside the campground entrance, with the keys still in the ignition and his wallet on the passenger seat. Evan Miles had vanished. News of the tragedy at Parkwood Campground spread rapidly across the small mountain town of Eldridge. It started with whispers among locals, then exploded into a full-scale media storm as national networks picked up the story. A father's disappearance and the deaths of three young girls. It was the kind of case that captured the nation's attention. Parkwood, once known for its peaceful trails and scenic lakes, was now being called the site of a nightmare. Authorities quickly sealed off the area, turning a family campsite into a crime scene. Autopsies performed on Ava, Leah, and Sophie revealed a horrifying yet perplexing cause of death: suffocation. There were no visible injuries, no bruises, no signs of restraint. The medical examiner reported that each girl had likely been smothered while sleeping, using a pillow or soft object. It had been done with precision, quietly, without leaving evidence of a struggle. Toxicology screens came back clean. No sedatives, no drugs, nothing in their systems to suggest they'd been made unconscious beforehand. What disturbed investigators most was the atmosphere inside the tent. It looked more like a bedtime routine than a crime scene. The girls were dressed in pajamas. A children's book lay open beside Sophie's sleeping bag. A flashlight, still turned on, was resting near Leah's pillow. Everything appeared arranged, almost intentionally. Officers began to suspect that this wasn't the act of a stranger or an intruder. There was no sign of forced entry. No evidence anyone else had entered the campsite. Attention quickly turned to Evan Miles. The single father, now missing, had become the prime suspect. A search was launched in every direction. Drones scanned the woods. Bloodhounds followed scent trails that ended at the nearby creek. Helicopters circled the mountains. The FBI joined the case, declaring Evan Miles a person of interest. But despite an intense manhunt, no trace of him was found. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Inside the tent, under a camping stove, police found a folded sheet of paper. It was handwritten, short and cryptic. "Forgive me, I tried." The note offered no context, no confession, and no clear motive. Forensic analysis confirmed it was written by Evan, but it did little to explain his actions. Did he kill his daughters? Was he planning to take his own life but failed to go through with it? Or was he running from something or someone else? Eldridge, a town where crime was rare and neighbors trusted one another, was gripped by fear and confusion. Parents kept their children indoors. Rumors ran wild. Some believed Evan had lost his mind. Others thought he had faked his own death. A few whispered about a deeper, darker reason, some secret he was trying to protect his daughters from. Still, no one could answer the most haunting question. Why? Why would a father, once described as loving and devoted, do something so unthinkable? And where was he now? As days turned into weeks, the only certainty was that Evan Miles had vanished. And the truth, whatever it was, had gone with him. As investigators dug deeper into Evan Miles' life, they began uncovering layers that painted a very different picture from the one shown in family photos. On the surface, Evan had appeared to be a quiet, responsible single father. But underneath that calm exterior, there were signs of a man unraveling long before the tragedy at Parkwood Campground. Evan had once lived a seemingly normal life with his wife Sarah and their 3 daughters in a modest suburban home just outside of Seattle. He worked in IT, mostly remote jobs, and Sarah had been a schoolteacher. But in 2019, everything changed. During a weekend hike in the mountains, Sarah had fallen to her death. According to the official report, she lost her footing and tumbled down a steep slope while Evan went to retrieve water. Her death was ruled accidental, though there were no witnesses. Evan told authorities he had tried to revive her and called for help, but cell reception was limited. At the time, no one pressed further. But now, investigators were reviewing Sarah's case with new eyes. It hadn't seemed suspicious then, but in light of the recent deaths, questions surfaced. There were no photos from that hike. No one else had seen Sarah arrive or leave. And when investigators spoke to Sarah's sister, she revealed something chilling. Sarah had considered separating from Evan just weeks before the accident. She had mentioned that he had become paranoid and distant, often saying he felt the world wasn't safe for their children. After Sarah's death, Evan's life began to deteriorate. He quit his job and withdrew from friends and family. He declined therapy and refused any financial help, insisting he could manage on his own. Reports from neighbors showed a troubling pattern. He rarely let the girls play outside. He installed blackout curtains, covered cameras, and once told a neighbor he believed someone was watching his house. His daughters were pulled out of school shortly after Sarah's death. Evan claimed it was for safety reasons and began homeschooling them using materials he bought online. But there was little evidence of structured learning. Instead, notebooks recovered from the home were filled with erratic scribbles, copied Bible verses, and survivalist notes. Evan seemed to be preparing for something, stockpiling canned food, solar chargers, and even water purification tablets. Digital forensics offered even more disturbing insights. Evan's laptop contained a folder titled Safe World. Inside were dozens of saved articles about societal collapse, child abduction theories, and obscure cult teachings. He had bookmarked pages about smothering deaths, how long it took to die from lack of oxygen, and how to live off the grid without detection. The searches spanned over a year, suggesting long-term planning. Evan's mental health appeared to be in sharp decline, but he had avoided any medical intervention. No records showed he ever sought psychological help. No one had noticed, or if they had, no one intervened in time. As investigators pieced together this darker history, one thing became clear. Evan Miles had not just disappeared from a campground, he had been slipping away from reality for years. But what no one could answer was whether Evan had truly believed he was saving his daughters or simply choosing to end their story before the world could. 4 weeks after the discovery at Parkwood Campground, the case had grown cold. Despite an exhaustive search of nearby towns, mountain trails, and forest shelters, Evan Miles remained missing. With no confirmed sightings, authorities were left with speculation. Had he fled into the wilderness to die, or was he alive, living under a new identity, hiding in plain sight? The trail seemed to end at the campground, but then, deep in the forests of Pine Ridge, a chance discovery reignited the investigation. A forest ranger patrolling a remote area over 60 miles from Parkwood stumbled across something unusual: a small cabin hidden behind a dense wall of brush and trees. It wasn't listed on any ranger maps and looked abandoned at first, but the ranger noticed signs of recent use: footprints in the dirt, tire marks from a bike, and a faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. Inside the cabin, everything was still and quiet, but it quickly became clear that someone had been living there. Investigators arrived the next day and searched the cabin thoroughly. They found non-perishable food items, water jugs, and simple living supplies. There were candles, hand tools, and a makeshift bed made of blankets and sleeping bags. Tacked onto the wooden wall above the bed was a piece of paper drawn in crayon. It showed a man with 3 girls, standing beneath a dark cloud. Written beside it in a child's handwriting were the words, "We ray together now." There were no fingerprints on the paper, but DNA testing confirmed the presence of Evan Miles. Authorities now had proof he was still alive and had likely lived in the cabin after fleeing the campground. However, there was no sign of him when they arrived. It appeared he had left in a hurry. The only major clue left behind was a burner phone hidden beneath a floorboard. It had no SIM card, but logs revealed several attempted calls to an unknown number labeled only as L. Investigators traced this lead to an online alias tied to a woman named Laura Nash, a 42-year-old former paramedic turned survivalist. She had been active on multiple conspiracy forums under the name Lone Pine 42, where she and Evan had reportedly exchanged messages for over a year. When questioned, Laura admitted to knowing Evan but denied having any involvement in the deaths. She claimed she helped him plan his escape because he told her the government was targeting his family and that his daughters were not safe in the modern world. She said she didn't believe he had harmed them, only that he wanted to disappear. Authorities searched Laura's property but found no sign of Evan. She was later charged with obstruction of justice and aiding a fugitive. Her statements, while unsettling, were vague and filled with references to global conspiracies and secret government projects. Nothing she said could be confirmed. With the discovery of the cabin, the narrative shifted. Evan had help. He wasn't just running, he was hiding with purpose. He had a plan, possibly more connections, and the knowledge to survive for months in isolation. But the question remained, where would he go next? And how far was he willing to go to stay hidden? Months passed with no sign of Evan Miles. The trail once again grew cold, and public interest slowly faded. Parkwood Campground reopened, but few campers returned. The tent site where the girls were found was quietly retired from use, now overgrown with brush and marked only by a small wooden post with no number. For investigators, the case remained a haunting mystery, unfinished, unsettling, and unresolved. Despite all the media coverage, the nationwide manhunt, and forensic evidence, Evan remained out of reach. Some believed he had taken his own life after fleeing the cabin. Others were convinced he was still out there, surviving deep in the wilderness. Then, in May 2023, a new lead surfaced hundreds of miles away in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. A local hunter reported encountering a strange man while tracking elk along a remote trail. The man appeared unshaven, thin, and dressed in layers of mismatched clothing. He carried a walking stick and kept his face turned away. When the hunter offered water, the man refused and quietly disappeared into the trees. At first, it seemed like a random encounter with a local hermit, but when shown a photo of Evan Miles, the hunter was certain it was the same man. Search teams were dispatched immediately, combing the area with drones, dogs, and heat sensors. But as before, Evan had vanished before they could close in. At a nearby stream, authorities discovered traces of a makeshift campsite charcoal from a small fire, a tin cup, and a torn flannel shirt. No solid evidence, but enough to suggest he had been there. Still, nothing led directly to Evan. He remained as elusive as ever, seemingly always one step ahead. Weeks later, another clue appeared, but this time, it wasn't found in the woods. Evan's father, who had remained mostly silent during the investigation, contacted police after receiving a package in the mail. It was small and wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, one that hadn't been seen before. It showed Evan sitting beside a riverbank with Ava, Leah, and Sophie. All three girls looked happy, dressed in casual clothes, their hair blowing in the wind. They were smiling. The setting did not match any known family trips or locations. On the back of the photo were 5 handwritten words: "We're safe now. I kept them." Authorities were stunned. The photo appeared genuine, but its origin was unclear. Some believed it was taken during a past trip and sent now as a twisted message. Others feared it meant something more disturbing, that Evan had staged everything and that the girls' bodies at the campground were not who they seemed to be. DNA testing had long confirmed their identities, but the photograph raised new doubts, even if only briefly. In the end, no further evidence emerged. Evan Miles was never found. Whether he died in the woods, crossed into Canada, or built a new life under a new name, no one could say for sure. He became a ghost, a myth, a question without an answer. What happened at that campground remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in recent history, a story not just of tragedy, but of how little we sometimes know about the people closest to us.